Hello, I'm Lynn Davenport here with Families Engaged, and I'm doing a presentation on the Delphi technique. And I have a bunch of ladies in the room here, so this will be somewhat interactive because they all have experienced being Delphied in their respective districts. And so I want to define what exactly that is and how to recognize it in your school district when it's happening to you. So the Delphi technique, it's something that happens when they bring in key stakeholders, is what they say. I don't like that term because that reduces us to, it's kind of an impersonal definition of a taxpayer, a parent, a community member, a citizen. They call us stakeholders. So what the Delphi technique is, or the Delphi method, it was developed by the Rand Corporation back in the 50s. And it can be used for military, for education, for city, civics, civilian work. And so essentially what it is, it's where you gather those who are highly engaged in an issue. Generally, you'll see it in your school districts for let me give Richardson ISD as an example. We had a strategic plan that we were to put together as a community. And so they wanted to bring together stakeholders for this community meeting. And so what they do is they get a likable person who's the facilitator. And that person can be a district employee or a city employee, depending on what the meeting is, or they can hire a facilitator. That seems to be customary now. What they do in school districts now is they will hire a company like Engage to Learn. Engage to Learn was a company started by Shannon Burke. She came out of Coppell ISD. My superintendent now is from Coppell ISD. So, they hand these contracts to their buddies who start these education consulting companies. So they actually make money off the system where they were trained, and they leave the system and then go back in from the outside and get these fat contracts. And so, I'm going to read a quote from this gentleman who wrote an article. This was years ago, but I found it and I thought it was really good. It says, "This article from the vault gives solutions on how to counter being manipulated and nudged toward manufactured consensus. The process used to facilitate the meeting is called the Delphi Technique. This Delphi technique was developed by the Rand Corporation for the U.S. Department of Defense back in the 1950s. It was originally intended for use as a psychological weapon during the Cold War. However, it was soon recognized that the steps of the Delphi could be very valuable in manipulating any meeting toward a predetermined end." And that's what I figured out years ago, is that they have a preordained outcome established well before the meeting ever began or begins, and they nudge you toward that direction, giving you the sense that you've contributed. They have giant sticky note pads, and you go and you write your feelings or your opinions or your ideas on that sticky pad, and those are put, and they break you out into small groups, and those are all stuck on a gallery wall, they call it. And sometimes you'll have the gallery wall already up there, and then you go and write your ideas on a smaller sticky note, and then you go stick it in the category where you think it goes. And then they will tell you, we are going to keep the notes of this meeting and we're going to compile this all together, and that will lead us to consensus, and everybody feels all warm and fuzzy because they got their points across and they were heard as a stakeholder. They were heard. But knowing that that preordained outcome has already been established before the meeting began should give you a clue that you're being manipulated during the process. And that is a generally, like, I'll give another example of our equity committee that was done in Richardson ISD. I'll give that in just a minute. So the rest of this says, how does the process take place? The techniques are well developed and well defined. First, the person who will be leading the meeting, the facilitator or the change agent, must be a likable person with whom those participating in the meeting can agree or sympathize. And this is, I found this from the Virginia Land Rights Coalition. And so a gentleman named Albert Burns is the one who wrote this. And so he clued in because this was happening to him and his community. And so that can be found on the web, on the internet. And we can include a link on here later. Okay, so back to my school district, like most school districts, basically the equity committee that was formed as part of our strategic plan that came through our school board. Then they established this equity committee because they said we need to establish more equitable practices in Richardson ISD. So this is how eventually the diversity, equity, and inclusion department came about, and the diversity, equity, and inclusion policy came about. So they put together the stakeholder committee meetings, and there were different groups. There was one on facilities. There was one on equity. There was one on, oh gosh, I can't remember the other ones, but I was put on the equity team. And so we all received an email saying, congratulations, you've been chosen for the equity team. And so I go and I'm thinking, okay, well, I've done all my research on how spending is done in Richardson ISD. It's not equitably done. So I'm all for equity. If you look at our low income campuses, they spend less money per pupil than our affluent communities. So who wouldn't be for dispersing resources more equitably amongst our individual campuses? So I'm thinking we're going to talk money and we're going to talk about resources for equity. No, that's not why we were there. We were there to break up into small groups, and most of the people that they stack on these committees are actually employees, not stakeholders. Now they can be one, they can be both. They can be a community, a taxpayer in the community and work for the district. That's possible, but most of these people don't. And so they stack them on purpose because they know that the people who are employees of the district, they're not going to go up against their district and the agenda that they're pushing down on us. Now they also generally don't pick people like me, but they know they have to, or else I'm going to raise a big stink because I pay attention to who's chosen for these committees and I know what they're doing. And so they pick yes men from the community. They'll pick the real estate agents because and not all real estate agents are like this, but generally they're big cheerleaders and supporters of the community. They help support things. They're big sellers of, all the benefits to living in that community. They have a vested interest, and they're going to talk up the school ratings and the school's success. And sometimes they'll be honest with you, and sometimes they'll do it because they want to sell the house. Oh yeah, the schools are great. They're great. And so they become the cheerleaders. So they're a lot of times invited. You have business leaders and business owners in the communities. And then you have chambers of commerce people. And they're usually some of the worst. And I call them, well, I'm not going to say what I call it, but the chambers are yes men as well. And so they oftentimes are stacked on these committees. And then you'll have school board trustees who are also invited to these meetings. And so, when I went to the equity meetings, I figured out they broke us into small groups and we would talk about the things that I just mentioned, like, okay, are we going to do this, talk about how they're spending the money? And since you have district leaders there, I thought, okay, can we have actual data that says how they're spending the money per campus, per pupil, and the resources that they have, and the number of teachers, and the student ratio? All of those things play into the budget, and that should be considered for equity. It was not. We basically talked about emotions, feelings, these kind of utopian vision for the schools, but there was nothing with real teeth. There was nothing of substance. It was all just kind of like, I feel this way. I think this. What if we did that? But it was nothing really concrete. And in order for us to make better decisions on equity, I thought we needed that. Well, we didn't have that. So then they produced this report from the equity committee that was supposed to be from all the information that was gathered from us. But really what happened was they created a diversity, equity, and inclusion department, which costs more money for the district. They hire an administrator, and then that imposed all of these unconstitutional, unethical things in our district because of this agenda that they had well before this equity team was put together. And so also it was a redundant policy because the policy is already in there. BQ local and legal says that we should consider all stakeholders. We should have a representation from all parts of the district and the communities. And instead they created this redundant thing. So the question is, if they were following policy, that existing policy, why would they even need a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy if they were doing what they're supposed to do here? No. So they just create new policies. It's like Band-Aids and new really boondoggles, because then they bring in the consultants who tell us how to be more equitable, diverse, and inclusive. But in reality, they're the ones with the purse strings. They're the ones who aren't being equitable. They're the ones who are not getting a diverse representation, and they're actually not educating and representing the diverse students that we have, because you can show there's very direct proof that the children who are in poverty and minority and low income, they are performing the worst. More than half of our kids can't read on grade level. So you can see how these Delphi committees, coming back to that, they're all for show. Anybody have an example of what you've seen that in your district? Who wants to, you can go first. Yeah. Who? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So,
Talk loud. You don't have to come up, you just talk loud. Lovejoy. Mm-hmm.
We have a financial sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly the same. And they did the sticky note practices and exercises, and
right.
So they just voted to do a VRTRE on the ballot.
And a TRE is a tax hike. That's basically where they put it to the voters, and they can maximize on the tax rate, go from what, $1 to $1.17 or whatever the max is. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, and and then it all comes back to, well, the financial sustainability committee said this is what we needed to do. And
so the financial sustainability committee then becomes the yes arm of the agenda that was preordained before the meeting began, which is they want to put a TRE tax hike before the voters. Mm-hmm. So then they can point, oh, but these reputable members of our community say we need to do this. And so therefore that's like it's a justification tool using us against us.
Yes,
basically.
Mm-hmm. But your community members said.
Yes, that's exactly what our district is doing. So you're saying Lovejoy is doing the same thing. Well, and that reminds me, when I was also on a bond review committee, and when I sat down, they gave us a card, and the card had all of these things and then a blank line. So it was all these preordained things that they thought should be on that bond. So it was technology upgrades, and I don't know, there were a number of things that I saw in there, and then the blank line, I filled in. Okay, so they had career technical education and junior reserve officer training corps, collaborative learning spaces, which is very controversial, because that's where they use bond dollars to create these open spaces. They no longer need books in the library. They want these, it's like Starbucks meets IKEA, but they have to spend a ton of money to revamp these spaces, and they call them collaborative learning spaces. And then multi-purpose facilities, which are it's like a massive sports facility that, of course, requires more upkeep. And so it all just keeps the debt revolving. The debt continues. And then technology was the fourth one. Then the last one that was blank, I wrote in education, because hello, that's their primary role, is to educate students. But that is never really the priority. It's always about buildings and technology. Yes.
I just want to bring up something that I've noticed in your description of your DIE
Mm-hmm.
Committee meetings.
I like that she called it DIE instead of DEI, because it should die. These policies should die. Yeah. No, but go ahead.
So Alan had all of a sudden decided to allow several conservatives on the SHAC committee. However, our SHAC committee this year differs from any other year previously,
Mm-hmm.
where they are doing exactly what you just said. They're breaking everyone up into groups. It's filled with, it's a completely different setup. And I didn't know that this is what they were doing, but now I see it. Also Garland, and Plano, so he's gonna have theirs. Lovejoy and Frisco don't allow any conservatives on the board, but I've been contacted from several different people who are conservatives on their SHAC committees. And now all of a sudden SHAC's run completely different. And they break everybody up into separate groups, and they've only had one meeting so far this year. But I've been trying to connect the dots to find out what's the difference, what's changing,
Right.
and this is it.
So she's talking about the School Health Advisory Committee, the SHAC committee. And so this year they're doing something different than they did the years before. And now it looks more like this Delphi committee model. Yes. And it's the school districts are, you know, they're trying to get one step ahead of us because they know we're onto them. They know we're watching what they're doing. I mean, the jig is up, right?
Yep.
So then they have to, then they will use our tax dollars to hire these consultants. So that the consultants who are part of the swamp will say, okay, here's how you get around it. And Mary and it reminds me of what we were doing with the exposing Walsh and Gallegos.
Okay, yes, Walsh and Gallegos, but also the work groups for social studies, teach, those
Yeah.
work groups, that's how they.
Oh, perfect example.
then
Yes,
the-
thank you. I'll bring that up.
Came to my mind because
Mhm.
because people who were a part of the EdSec committee, the TPA and the EdSec committee.
Yes, stacked.
People who were on it, they called to say, you know, they didn't like the product, the recommendation that came from the appropriately selected, so
Mm.
they've gone back and now they're literally doing the exact same thing. It also reminds me of the process that the search firms use when they're looking for a school superintendent.
Oh, that's a great one.
They
Yes.
find-
What
And
kind
they-
of superintendent do you want? What would you like to see? Put it on the sticky note.
They did,
Right.
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
you put it inside
This
the
is-
category.
We'll call this Delphi, the sticky situation.
This situation for sure, but what really comes to mind, and I think, you know, I'm listening to this, and I'm like, you know, our state board of education members, they really need to be educated on this. and-
On Delphi,
and
yeah.
that many of them have never even heard of it.
Gosh.
That is what the TEA is doing, and how they even get stuff to present to them. This is very dangerous.
This is, you bring up, that is a great point because I was thinking about Walsh and Gallegos, the law firm that 70% of districts are using, where they are hired with our tax dollars to, in the education service centers, which there are 20 across the state, they're hiring Walsh and Gallegos in order to teach them how to not follow some of the bills that have been passed, like Senate Bill 3. So they teach them how to skirt that. So then also what Mary was talking about is the TEKS, the standards. When we were having the social studies TEKS debate at the State Board of Education, they had these workshops where they brought in people, supposedly a sampling of people from across Texas, but those were stacked for one. And two, they used the Delphi process, the Delphi technique, in order to nudge them in a certain direction. So then they came before the state board and they testified saying, no, the process was wonderful. We got to give our input and there were 1,000 hours that we spent on this, right? What didn't they say? It was 1,000 hours. And when I testified, I said, that ain't nothing compared to what is going to roll down to the teachers and the students and all these changes that you make. That's going to cost us countless hours of grief and frustration, and the fallout will be massive. And I don't know how we would ever even return from that. So what else anybody else seeing anything in their districts that sounds like a Delphi technique?
Well, definitely I recognize it in the chat, but I mean,
Mhm.
that was a great example. I definitely recognize it they've been doing it in the chat.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably in everything, and I even wonder how much of it is done at the school board themselves.
Well, did
True.
we already mention growth committees for bond proposals?
No. Well, we talked about bonds and TREs, but would you say growth committees?
Well, your growth committees are brought together and they
Mhm.
use this method so that you have the community buy-in on the bond package that they want the board to approve.
I see.
And
Yeah,
then
so
you have-
that's what they did with ours too. Same with our strategic
And
plan.
then your growth committee then morphs into your bond
Yes.
progress committees.
This is brilliant. It's actually brilliant.
a
It's so
circle
manipulative.
thing.
Right. It's a self-dealing and self-fulfilling kind of So yeah, you create the same committee and it also makes them feel important. So then they're treated like they're important members of the community. And then people go to them and they'll say, oh, I heard you were on this committee. And it's yes. And then they all get the consensus. And then they make those people feel important. They elevate them. Oh, thank you so much and then they bring in catered food that we all, the taxpayers, pay for, and Tiff's treats and, fun. I mean, it's very professional, and you feel like, you've given your input and,
Well, I think
That-
people
yeah.
feel elevated.
oh, absolutely.
When they're selected to be within these committees, they become more elevated in their own thinking.
Very much so.
They're more important than the other taxpayers.
So how do we?
Yes.
actually-
So solutions, yes.
Like the people, they do, and I see this and, at a higher, at a state level, is the closer that you get to the power.
Yes, they get to rub elbows with the power in the district,
Yeah.
the board trustees,
Uh,
absolutely. And,
And, obviously the government, with our own, it's like, how close do we get to the government? I mean, it's really crazy.
yeah, like, for example, we have a virtual learning commission. This happens with boards and commissions at the state level. If the governor appoints you to this, then most likely he's not going to appoint you to something that you don't align with him on. And then in order to stay in the hive, it's like queen bees and wannabes. There's like teenage girls who want to be part of the hive. And so they're like, oh, well, if I say what I really think, he's not going to keep me in the hive. He's going to bump me out. Somebody else is going to get in. So, okay, yes, I'm for that. Yeah, that absolutely happens.
So what's the solution?
So,
how
okay.
do we- first of all, we have to make everybody aware, but how do we defeat them?
Well, so I've analyzed this for a number of years, and the frustrating thing is, so in order to participate and understand what they're doing to you, then you have to at least, get on these committees to even know what's going to happen. And so I have been able to get on them, but I can never get behind what the final consensus is, because I know we've been manipulated. So I'm only one of maybe two people who recognizes this, who's on there. Because I do find people who I can see, understand, and then we share information. So but it's usually just a couple of us. So what I've done is I take the information. So I make if the list isn't public of the people, then I make that list public, because that should be public. And most districts will release who's on these committees. Ours does not. They keep it kind of, yeah. So I publish it myself, put it out there on Facebook, share what was happening in the meeting. It's the only tool that I know is, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And then also just explaining to people, do you think you're being Delphied? I mean, it's making that a common household term to know, because once you recognize it in your school districts, then you can see it happening, like you said, elsewhere at anything to do with government. This technique has been used and is being used. Even I saw it with the census committee that I was on, because I knew that they were using the census, the 2020 census, as a means to connect with new voters. And so it was another way just to turn the communities blue, but under the guise of, oh no, we need to count. Everyone counts. Everyone counts. Well, everyone counts because everyone can also vote. And it brought in more federal dollars and government dollars, the more people we counted. So they had multiple agendas going on with that. Other solutions. I think, we can take it from the floor, but if you have anything specific that you could see as a solution for how to combat the Delphi.
Well, I know that with, where I've seen that at the state level, that I literally just asked them to dig in their heels just because they were being to just, make a statement based on, I'm being manipulated, the information that I'm being given has been manipulated, and therefore what you're putting in front of me is not truth and accurate.
Mhm.
So I'm making a decision on false premises. And so because of that, I reject it.
Yes,
Which
that's
is
good.
kind of what happened with TPA a little bit.
Yeah, because once you figure out that you're being manipulated, then you expose it. And I know, like with the Teach for, what's it called?
Well, Teach for
Truth.
America.
No, I'm sorry, not Teach for America, but True the Vote, with the Texas, what is it? TCTA? What are they called? Or ATP, sorry. ATP,
Yeah.
where they produced articles exposing what was happening with the teacher the Ed TPA, which is the teacher certification. I thought of another one is too, when you realize that they're hiring consultants who do this Delphi technique, then you expose them. So you can ask for the contract, the data sharing agreement, any invoices that have been paid to that company, such as Engaged to Learn, because they also do other things like project-based learning and a global curriculum. I mean, they're deep into the shift away from academics to the affective and more change agent type, engaging these little global citizens who will go out and be activists rather than educated kids. Yes.
Can't you disrupt, because I've read something on this, can't you disrupt the method during the meeting?
Oh,
by
very good one. Yes.
Asking more in-depth questions on different topics?
Yeah, so you can be an agitator within the Delphi. So if you actually get on, then you within your group would say, well, I don't think that this is going to, like, we don't have enough data, say, so if there was a decision that you were trying to make and the district should have that at the ready, then you could say, we are not ready to move forward without having all of the pertinent data in order to make an informed decision. Because right now this is just based on kind of conjecture or maybe anecdotal evidence, or maybe just the way we feel rather than what we know. And so you can really press them during the process. And if you do that up front, see, it took me a while to figure out, and it is just me. So it helps if you have someone else doing the same thing. And if you can also with your group say, and I try to do this some because I was with other educators who actually agreed with me, because they were like, yeah, why don't we have all that? But they were too afraid to say something because they work for the district. And so you can shine a light, just be a wedge. I mean, that's really all we can do at this point. But if more and more people understand this, and being able to share this video here so people know, that's exactly what happened to me in my district. They're all doing the same thing. It's a blueprint. It's a cut and paste kind of strategy. Yes.
So as an agitator, once you're on a committee, any committee, I feel like this is also in school board.
Yeah.
As a team of 8, they do everything collectively, especially in Allen.
Team of 8. Yes.
Right.
Rubber
So,
stamp training.
Yeah. Okay. So as an agitator, you ask questions, request more data.
Mm-hmm.
Can we then continue to press on the data? Can we then table items so that they don't make, or how long can you request more data?
A lot of times these go on for a number of months. Even with the Public School Finance Commission, that went on for 10 months.
So it's not a decision that's made immediately. They
right.
have several meetings and just continue to ask for more data.
And,
mm-hmm.
and then expose it when you don't get it. Yeah.
In the meantime, say I have someone who's in, should I be PIRing invoices for companies like project-based learning companies and so forth?
Absolutely, because you'll learn things while you go through the process. She's asking if you should file public information requests, and you can also file public information requests about how the committee was formed, because that correspondence between the superintendent and all the board trustees are given a choice on who they appoint. And then there are the ones that are appointed by some of the administrators. They have different ways of appointing people. So you could file a public information request asking how they came to the conclusion. You can ask for their emails. You can ask for their calendar dates. Any meetings they've had should be on their public calendar. And then you can ask for invoices for, like I said, the companies that they use. And then anybody and also there, when we're talking about the bonds, they do hire bond, what do you call it? The bond, they're the ones that put together the marketing materials. Yes. And a lot of the contractors will fund those who get the contracts at the end, like the new buildings, they will fund the Vote Yes campaign. So you can file public information requests on
Like
that
too.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the suggestions that I would have to, like, you're not on the school board, but if you're trying to slow down the process, is a lot of success and colleagues, whatever ones, well, actually, I think it was an Amy Super, that started asking them to pull things from the consent agenda. Anything that you can pull from the consent agenda, it helps disrupt it too. And then the board members, you're kind of doing what we call providing cover for a board member to step out of line of the team of 8. Because you ask them to pull something from the consent agenda.
So if you pull a consent agenda, then you need 2 trustees to do that. And I don't know if every board is like, some districts you have to have 2 people in order for it to make it on the meeting.
By law, if it's a concept from the consent agenda.
Dallas.
They have to put it out for bid. They cannot just shove it in a consent agenda. And I promise you, I bet in every school district across the state of Texas, there are, if there's 20 items in the consent agenda in there, I bet 19 of them are over $50,000.
Yeah, so that's a good point.
So that's the way to disrupt that. That would be something that we would say, this is where, experience from.
She's talking about competitive bidding where there's a threshold each district has. And so if it's under 50,000, they wouldn't have to get approval for that and they wouldn't have to do competitive bidding, but anything over that, then that's a way to expose if they're steering contracts to certain preferred vendors, you'd want to know how they score them. How did they get that contract? And if it's over a certain amount, then it would need to be.
Unless they go to a by board, something that's already at the state
Oh,
level.
right.
So you know that you're getting the best bids.
Right.
But that's a great way, in my opinion, to disrupt.
Yeah.
Where you're not a part of the board, but the board, because what these boards have been Delphied.
Oh yeah, the boards are absolutely Delphied, and that's actually how they're part of their training is like the Delphi training because they go to the TASB convention, and in fact, there's one going on right now. The TASB is the Texas Association of School Boards, where they learn how to be a consensus building team of 8. They don't want any dissenters. They just want a lot of peace and rubber stamping, go along to get along. And it takes a lot of courage and fortitude for somebody to buck that and question, because you look like you're not a cheerleader or a team player. You look like you're a dissenter, and they don't want that, because if you do that, then that on camera in a public meeting would expose what they're doing. So, okay, well, in closing, anything else any other suggestions you have in order to disrupt the Delphi being Delphied?
I think the first step is educating people to recognize that it's going on and to learn how to start looking for it, and then intuitively to learn how to respond to it, and understanding that it does make you feel a little bit like you're not being on top of things, and that the other people are smarter than you, so you feel somewhat oppressed. But I see it, and I see that it gives them the upper hand.
Well, and people, what happens to me is that you get the whole, you go great, the whisper like, thank you for asking that. And so, the courage obviously is contagious. So and whether they have it yet or not, they do learn from those who are courageous, and they do appreciate it, because a lot of people do know that they're being played, but they don't have the courage to say something about it. So it helps to see others doing that. You could be a model for others. So, okay.
Thank you.
The last thing I'd like to say is all of the elected officials really need to do a better job understanding the parliamentary process and what their individual positions are required to do by law and
Sure.
what they're able to do while they're at the dais.
Yes, very much true. And in fact, they do a lot of walking and rolling quorums in districts. My district was sued for this, and it settled. So we couldn't read the deposition, which was unfortunate because it would have told more about how they do it. But they would basically take people 2 by 2, make decisions behind the scenes, and then come to the public horseshoe for the vote. And the decision was made behind closed doors. That's illegal. Yeah.
That's done by your primary staff member. At the school board level, that's going to be your superintendent.
Yep.
At a city level, that's going to be your city manager.
Yep.
So can we PIR stuff like this?
It's very
Not-
difficult to
it's very
bust them on this,
Just-
especially.
Just
Mhm.
Yeah, and just to wrap this up on that, because we really are talking about Delphi, I would
Right.
say the walking horns are really common, and as we try to educate people, when you're communicating with elected officials and you're sending a text message, do not ever text more than 2 of them at a time. If they were, or email, you need to send to individual emails, don't do group, because
That can be FOIA'd, and
Yeah,
then
it-
your correspondence could then be,
Yeah.
they could, somebody could file a public information request on you with your correspondence with the district. So what she's saying is don't email and correspond with more than one trustee
At a time.
or elected official at a time, because then that could be considered.
Well, you're putting them in a bad position, and they have had that happen before. When I communicate to state board members, I may call one and I may text another. I don't ever combine.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's it. Any questions on being Delphied, you can refer them to Families Engaged. Thanks.
Okay, did y'all want to